on the plate a little bit later on. There's a lot to get to, but let's start with Baylor. They lose to Texas State, and it was a disaster across the board.
Yeah, I think, we're going to have all week to sort of unpack that, but also, we'll need to move forward because there is a much bigger game on the horizon, and that's the next game, and that's the important thing, and that's going to be quite the challenge this weekend with the Utah rolling into town. I think the theme, from this weekend, just bottling up some of what you said there, was 3 of the Big 12's potential contenders all got hit in the mouth right away in week number 1. And in the case of a TCU or a Texas Tech, maybe the more optimistic folks certainly thought, maybe there's a chance that could be a playoff team, one of those. TCU obviously had to replace a lot. There were some doubts about them, but Texas Tech enjoyed an offseason of a lot of hype. TCU still had a lot of momentum. And then, Baylor, it was just a thought of, well, they're going to have to be better. And, you believe in Dave Aranda and that he's a good coach and that this was an aberration last year and they'll be back. And, across the board, they all got hit right away. And to your point, Baylor's of the 3 was the absolute worst loss, and it's not even close. Texas Tech went to double overtime. TCU and Colorado was a shootout that, TCU can look back on, and I think Sonny Dykes said it like, hey, you had a couple interceptions in the red zone. I know you can do that with every game. Texas Tech, Joey McGuire saying afterwards, well, on the final play, well, if the touchdown, well, if our linebacker does this, everybody can do that. You'd have to do a lot of that with Baylor and Texas State. There's a lot of things you'd have to point to and say, well, this could have happened and that could have happened and this could have happened and that could have happened, and then bam, that happens and then they win this game. That's how bad that was on Saturday night. Texas State rolled in, they dominated. They were bigger, faster, stronger. They were better coached. They played better. They played looser. They did it all better than Baylor did on Saturday night. That was a shocking result. I don't think anybody was ready to hang the national championship banner anytime soon, but that was a result that, goes and just completely deflates the fan base right out of the gates after months and months of anticipation and excitement and build-up and looking forward to a new season, especially with the way last year ended. Just thank God football's back. And
boom,
they just drop one of the worst performances I've ever seen them in person have. Truly. And I've been covering them for, like a decade now at this point. And I know people evoke Liberty. That was worse than Liberty, given the circumstances. That was absolutely worse than Liberty was. So, a lot went wrong. A lot didn't look good. Dave Aranda addressed some of it this morning. And, there's obviously some notes to get to out of that as well that concern this weekend. But it was a bad weekend for the Big 12 in some ways. It was an awful weekend for Baylor. I think if you're Texas Tech and TCU, as we'll get to, you can look at those games and say, yeah, that was disappointing. Those were bad losses. But you can see where they almost weren't that. You can see where they were still very much in the game till the end. With Baylor, it was not that way. They got straight up beat up by Texas State.
We will have the conversation I had from earlier today with Dave Aranda in his office following his Football Monday press conference that he had with the media. A lot of times when I'm there, I'll ask a question, maybe one or two. But if it's also a day in which I have a chance to sit down with him, I will hold some of those back for the time I have with Dave Aranda. And I go over many things with him, including, was Texas State the better team as far as, I'm talking athletes. His thoughts about how can an offensive line that was destroyed by Texas State hope to improve in 1 week to face what is that big, huge ball of razor blades with Utah. Did this team misjudge their talent? Among some other things, including his demeanor and his personality, which was fine when they were 12-2, and now everyone says he doesn't have fire in his belly. That doesn't mean because outwardly you don't have a personality or you don't have that fire. You can win with both type of coaches. But I asked him if this will test him a little bit, and has there been any pressure from above following the loss to Texas State, and a lot more. Let's get to some of the things also coming out of that game. Quarterback Blake Shapen is out. Dave Aranda mentioned he had an MCL injury. The MRI comes back, and he is out for between 2 and 3 weeks. That means he's out for Utah, out against Long Island. Okay, they're going to win that game no matter what we saw Saturday, and then also most likely out against Texas when they come to town in 3 weeks or in 2 weeks. Also, that could be longer. Sawyer Robertson, the Mississippi State transfer, had some nice flashes. At the same time, had a turnover, but at least trying to get more he will be the starting quarterback. R.J. Martinez for Baylor, who, remember, came as a kind of a walk-on type player. He's got some experience, probably more than anyone among the quarterbacks. We might be seeing him a little bit, who knows, in their game coming up against Utah. There's also other injuries. Do you have that one, Garrett, from Craig, that were mentioned as well? Devin Lemire out 2 to 3 weeks with a dislocated elbow, and also Garmin Randolph, outside linebacker, one of the few guys that might be able to put pressure on quarterbacks, is out for 1 or 2 weeks with a high ankle sprain. So that's just some. That doesn't include all the other bumps and bruises and also the aches and pains.
Well, Blake Shapen played well given the circumstances, and so I really feel for him. He went out and won the starting job for the second year in a row, did all he was supposed to do this offseason, had high marks, in terms of the way he'd stepped up as a leader and matured and done all of those things. And then right out of the gates, the very first game, I talk about the fan base getting deflated and all the offseason expectations. Well, we heard so much about how Blake had grown and all this, and it was finally time to see it. And, the good news is that we did see it. He definitely looked like a guy that was out there trying to lead. He was a guy that was trying to play by example, was trying to fight through an injury. But by the end of that game, he was halfway wrapped up like a mummy. He was clearly in a lot of pain, and he was struggling to move a lot. And it was clear that he was hurt. And, then Aranda lets it be known that, he had an MCL injury. And, your heart sinks for the guy because he worked so hard to get into this spot. It's the nature of the game. But those are big games that he's missing. And he has a lot of experience that, even if he was starting and completely healthy, I don't think that flips the results or predictions in anybody's minds for those games. But you would much rather have him than not have him. And after all his hard work, that's just really a shame. So hopefully he can be back sooner rather than later. As far as the other two, those hurt as well. Those are a couple of starters on defense. But given the way the defense played, I don't know how much that'll be noticeable, like those guys in particular, but yeah, it's not good that you're losing, especially a guy like Garmin Randolph, who's played quite a bit, is one of your bigger, more physical guys, and you're going to need that against Utah. And then the secondary, they were, taken advantage of in a lot of ways by G.J. Kinney's offense, and to now be down one of your starting safeties when that was already a problem as well is just more bad news. So it was a rough weekend, a rough Saturday, and at least the good news is with those 3 injuries is all of them are within the couple weeks range. Of course, that can change, but it's better than the out 6 to 8 weeks, and it's better than the out for the season. So if there's a positive or a positive spin you can put on it, I guess it would be that. But, yeah, those are 3 losses for sure that you'd rather have on Saturday.
Shapen, 21 of 31, 303 yards, 2 scores, sacked a couple of times, and many other times was having to move around in the pocket. Averaged 9.5 yards per attempt, which is a pretty good number. But the problem, again, is they aired it out a little bit, but it did seem to be very conservative for the most part. They also could not run the ball, which I asked that question in the pregame. What happens if they can't run it? I don't care who they're playing. They're going to have trouble.
Well, and I told you, I said, if they can't run the ball, then what are we even talking about here? Because that was the big, theme of the offseason was going to be the strength of the running backs. Well, the problem is they didn't say anything about the strength of the O-line. So, yeah, you might have a good running back room, but if nobody can block, then it doesn't really matter. And that's what we saw on Saturday night. We saw an offensive line that was woefully below what you would expect the standard or what you would expect to see in this first game. And that was alarming, and it was very obvious from the outset as the running backs just really weren't even involved, at various points of that game, whether because you were trailing and you had to pass the ball or because you just simply couldn't run it no matter what you tried. How that changes against Utah, I have no idea. And that's the alarming part of that performance on Saturday was that a lot that went wrong wasn't like, oh, well, we'll fix that, or it was just drop passes. It was drop passes, but it was also not being able to block. It was not being able to protect your quarterback or get a run game. It was a doozy of a night, that's for sure, here in Waco.
So there's that. Now, I'm going to play one comment from Dave Aranda in today's press conference because obviously everybody had to feel the wrath of everybody else after the loss. Then we're going to get into Colorado, Deion, TCU, Texas Tech, Wyoming, and the rest of the Big 12, and Kansas is going to get their quarterback back this week. And what a week it was for the Pac-12, and so much more, including the games coming up this weekend, plus a couple of other notes that we'll have from the weekend from some tweets and also information. So here was Dave Aranda today and discussing this and that. But I had to ask this question to me that was very relevant based on what happened Saturday night. Dave, which conversation was more difficult since Saturday, with your players or your staff?
They're both difficult. Yeah, I appreciate that. I think that, I think staff-wise, there's been, you're down in a valley, you climb up a mountain only to find out, the start of the season, and there's more mountains. And, you're kind of hoping that you're kind of reaching a peak and you're kind of taking off. And for that not to be the case is, I think it's one of the things with this sport, much like life, And so I think having that talk with them on, hey, this is what it is. Where are our faults in it? What can we improve? A lot of those talks that's what's been the last 2 days. And then with our team, it's, hey, this is what you did. This isn't who you are. We've seen who you are. We want to be able to put that on tape. We want to show the world that. And so I think it's kind of holding that together. And I think there's a ton of leadership in that room that's going to help with that. But both of those are hard. Anytime that there's a disappointment, it's difficult.
I do know there's no question there has to be pressure on what happened with the coaching staff, because it was not good. And that doesn't mean that they weren't prepping or they didn't coach their butts off, but something didn't work. And let's not forget now, you have a new defensive coordinator in Matthew Pallage, a rising star in the coaching profession, first ever game as a defensive coordinator. And how much did Dave Aranda help him with that? But to me, even though they were blistered on defense, to me, it was still that they just had nothing really in the tank when it came to the running game on offense.
Yeah, and let's just summarize it this way, and I want to get a little further into that. But for all the folks out there that aren't, tapped in here into Waco or just loosely, it's like we're following, Cincinnati and what's going on there, or Iowa State and what's going on there. Disagree with me if you want to. I think it's fair to say that any talk about Dave Aranda in the hot seat leading into last Saturday was completely ridiculous.
Yep.
Like, there's nowhere where I would agree that was the case or even in the works, and that it would take a disastrous type of season over the long haul, some really bad losses to put him on there. I think Saturday was bad enough that it immediately bumped him right onto that conversation and onto that hot seat, where they're going to have to dramatically improve soon and over the course of the next few weeks to change that conversation. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I do. I also know that they had remembered, and it's always a part of when you extend somebody, the buyout is very large or what they would owe him, but that was unacceptable. And in fact, in the postgame, and Craig, you were there, I asked him, is this acceptable? And it's not. It was an absolute, just horrifying night for Baylor when it comes to who they are, who they wanted to be, and he understands that. Believe me, he understands that. We'll have Mac on tomorrow, Mac Rhodes, and we could also follow that up. But, yeah, there's let's put it this way. It's kind of like when you have a heating pad and you turn it on. It takes a while to get warmed up. And it depends on what notch you're on. But I do think that, yes, it's not all fun. He'll give you an interesting story. We're walking from the presser to his office to do the interview. He went to use his security, like I don't know if it's a fingerprint or whatever the security number. It would not open. The door would not open. And he said to me, and this is with a lot of, like, he feels the pressure, although he says in an interview a little bit later on what he thinks about that. He was like, God, they've already locked me out of the building.
It reminds me of the Jamal Adams video when he's trying to get into the Jets facility, and he's like almost starts crying because like, did they already cut me? And then somebody lets him in, and you can like see, you can feel the relief through the video because he had a panic moment. And I know Aranda was joking, but no, there's some truth in that joking, because that's the reality. It's not like the flames are like burning up, and if they don't make a move soon, then it's all going to, turn to ash. It's not that. It's just that it's a conversation that some wondered when it might happen, like what it would take to get there. And that result on Saturday was bad enough that I think we've just fast-forwarded right to it. And to your point about the run game, that's what your entire offense is built on.
That's
and
your
it's the one thing
personality,
you could not do, and you couldn't do it at all effectively whatsoever. And so if the run game's not working against Texas State, what is it going to do against Utah and Texas and so on and so forth for 11 more weeks? The game here in a couple weeks, Long Island. All right, you feel good about that one, but after Saturday, you don't feel good about another game, not one, on the rest of the schedule. So, yeah, it's changed in a quick amount of time. I like Dave Aranda a lot. I'm hoping he finds a way for them to go on a run, but that was bad on Saturday.
There's a note in the chat room, and then we'll move on to the rest of what we saw throughout the conference in America. Alan Williams, Aranda on the hot seat makes sense. Baylor has to stay relevant with conference realignment always part of the discussion. There's no question you could fall into oblivion, and Baylor's been there before, and they surely want to make sure that they don't find themselves all of a sudden with 3 consecutive, 2-7, 12-2, last year 6-7, and whatever this year might end up with.
Do you realize that they've lost 5 straight games?
Yeah, no, I asked you that.
Dating back to last year till now, they've lost 5 straight, and to your point, this is not a time for a program of that size and all of that to be in the situation that they're possibly walking into, where there's a lot of uncertainty and the program's starting to dip, because a program very similar to you in TCU was just in the playoff last year and won a playoff game. And I know they lost to Colorado, but that one you can at least say, like, they could have won that game. There was like a thing here and there, and you know what? They chalk it up and they'll move on and they'll be fine. Texas Tech, they lose a game. You can at least say, like, okay, you can see where it wasn't good based on offseason and hype and all of that, but you can at least see, like, where there was a win still there. With Baylor, you'd have to bring up, like, 5 different things that would have had to happen differently. It wasn't really that close of a game at all, certainly not compared to those two. So those two, they feel good about Sonny Dykes. They feel great about Joey McGuire. They feel great about the future. And then you have SMU, who's now jumping to the ACC. You got Texas State, who's now more exciting than you because they just beat you. And so you look around, Texas is going to the SEC.
UTSA, despite the loss.
They love Jeff Traylor. They don't, So, yeah, you look around, and you've got to be very careful for sure.
Yeah, it was a bad night all the way around. Believe me, from administration all the way through the football program, you could feel it in that game and also afterwards.